Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1993 and take a look at an album by one of the most criminally underrated bands of its era. The self-titled debut album by California indie-popsters Possum Dixon. Now, Possum Dixon were formed in Los Angeles, California in 1989 by singer Rob Zabrecky and guitarist Kelso Chavez. Apparently, the name Possum Dixon was inspired by a murder suspect that the band's founding members saw profiled one evening on the hit television show America's Most Wanted. In the band's infancy, they were known primarily as a two-piece, playing around the Java House circuit in Southern California. About a year after the band's formation, they recruited guitarist Robert O'Sullivan and drummer Richard Truell to fill out what would become the band's classic lineup. In 1991, the band released its first EP, and in 1993, they released their self-titled debut album on Interscope Records. I would make the argument that in the band's relatively brief 10-year career, they put out 3 albums that I think still stand up to the test of time. Apart from the 1993 self-titled debut album, they also put out 1996's Star Homes and released their final album, New Sheets, in 1998. My personal relationship with Possum Dixon goes back to probably the end of 1994, at which time I was a huge fan of MTV generically, but specifically the show 120 Minutes. And to me, one of the highlights of 120 Minutes, apart from the fact that that was the show where MTV played the videos that weren't necessarily featured in heavy rotation, to me, the biggest highlight of 120 Minutes was the live performances by the bands who would serve as either in-studio guests or certain times guest hosts. And at the end of every year, at the end of every calendar year, back in those days, 120 Minutes would run their year-end special where they would profile the best of the in-studio live performances, which is the first time I ever heard Possum Dixon. I missed when they were actually on 120 Minutes, but I went back and I caught them at the year-end special on 120 Minutes, and I was completely drawn by their sound. I loved the song that they performed live, and I immediately went out and purchased this first album on CD, and I was immediately hooked. This is a band that I have been a huge fan of ever since. I had the opportunity to see Possum Dixon live one time back in the mid-1990s. Now, they did open for, I believe, I'm fairly certain it was the Violent Femmes. 95% certain that I saw them open for the Violent Femmes. Whenever I did see them play, however, they were the opener. Now, if you're sort of unfamiliar with Possum Dixon and their sound, I would say that sort of generically, Possum Dixon are kind of a combination of Camper Van Beethoven / Cracker, with a little bit of the Pixies mixed in there and a fair amount of late 1980s, early 1990s Dead Milkmen. They definitely combine elements of indie, college rock, neo-psychedelic, art pop, and they sort of mix that all together with extremely interesting lyrics by singer Rob Zabrecky, who I've always just had a tremendous love affair with his voice as well. Now, this is a band that I will never understand why they weren't more popular back in their time. This was a band that was as good, if not better, than many of their contemporaries who enjoyed much more success than Possum Dixon. And the fact that this band nowadays has slid into basically total obscurity is something that just baffles me. Now, I don't know how good of a gauge this is as far as judging popularity of bands, but if you go and you check out this band on Spotify, they have less than 3,000 monthly listeners, which to me is absolutely disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself. Hey, don't look at me. I'm always ashamed of myself. Okay. I have a master's degree in shame, son. Anyway, this record was released in October of 1993. It was released on Interscope Records. And this is an album that I absolutely love the production of. This record was produced by Earl Mankey. I love the production on this record. It's really clean, it's crisp, it's very indie, it's very sort of poppy, art pop. Elements of college rock, which is a term that we used to use back in those days, believe it or not. I think college rock sort of became indie rock. To me, this is about as college rock as it gets, especially when you go back to sort of like the early mid-1990s. Anyway, the first song on this record is a song called Nerves. To me, this song has a real sort of indie art pop, sort of 60s go-go, almost like 60s television Batman theme kind of sound to it. I love the music on this track. This song lyrically, to me, it's kind of like an anxiety attack. I mean, that's one of the things I love about this band is their lyrics. Sometimes they're difficult to interpret because they get to be a little bit abstract, which wasn't completely, abnormal back in the mid-1990s. But you don't get the impression, at least when you read the lyrics to Possum Dixon songs, especially the ones that are a little bit more abstract, you never get the impression that they're sort of deliberately muddy, which was sort of a criticism that I would sort of launch at some bands from that era. Some of the bands that I felt used lyrics that were abstract, I think it came across as being contrived and sort of deliberately murky, whereas with a band like Possum Dixon, it feels, a lot more authentic. That's one thing I've always loved about the band and their singer, Rob Zabrecky, is they come across as being very authentic. Rob Zabrecky, if you know much about him, he's genuinely a weird dude, and I say that as the highest compliment. I don't think this was at all contrived when he wrote these lyrics that were sort of spacey and sort of disjointed. I love the song Nerves. It's one of my favorite songs on the record. I would make the argument, really, that there isn't much clunkage on this album at all. Like I said, this band only put out 3 records, man. And within all 3 of the records, there's very limited amount of clunkage on any of the records, I would argue. The next song after that is a song called In Buildings. This has like a real sort of post-pop punk kind of art pop feel to it. I love the opening lyric where he talks about how she looks like she's an actress late for an audition. I also love the lyric where he says, I'd like to see her wrapped around me like a day in October. To me, this song conjures up images of a girl that is just always sort of disheveled. She's always running late. She always has sort of half a lint roller stuck to her back. Her hair's always kind of a wreck. She's covered in cat hair. But there's just something about her that you find to be sort of intoxicating. I love the way that he sort of describes this girl. In this song, she's very disheveled, but she is somebody that he finds, and as sort of an extension of that, you find to be, I don't know if it's necessarily like romantically interesting, but it's somebody that you were sort of drawn to. You find them interesting. You want to know, like, what her story is. The third song on this album is a song called Watch the Girl Destroy Me. This was the song that I first discovered when I discovered Possum Dixon. This was the song that they performed live on 120 Minutes back in 1994, I believe it was. And this was probably the band's biggest semi-hit. Like I said, I saw these guys back in the mid-1990s, and they were an opening band. I believe they opened for the Violent Femmes. I'm almost certain it was the first time I saw the Violent Femmes, it was with Possum Dixon. I'm fairly certain. I love this song lyrically. This song is like a letter to God, looking for help, in dealing with a girl that is probably not overly healthy for you. I love how in this song he talks about, at the beginning of the song, he sort of addresses God and says, hey, look, it's me. I know I haven't been around much. I'm not really the most devout practitioner of prayer, but I could use a hand here. It's not top priority. I realize that there are other issues in the world, but if you get around to it, if you could pay me a little of attention over here, I would greatly appreciate it. I love this song. This song should have been more popular. I will always stand on the issue, or I will always die on the hill, I guess I should say, that this band should have been incredibly more popular than they were. I mean, this is probably their most popular song. I would make the argument it is not anywhere near their best song. But if you ever go back, if you have an opportunity to check out their live performance of this song on 120 Minutes, there was also a video for this song that I think saw some modest airplay on MTV. I do remember hearing this song on the radio a handful of times as well. To me, this is a great song, though. The next song after that is She Drives. This song has a real sort of Cracker meets late 1980s, early 1990s Dead Milkmen sound. No complaints there. I love both Cracker and I love pretty much all of the Dead Milkmen's classic era. This song is upbeat. It's really, really catchy. Lyrically, it gets to be a little bit repetitive, but this is one of those songs that, you hear. I've been listening to this record all week. Again, trying to come up with some ideas and things to say about this record. And this is a song that just, you hear it, it instantly gets stuck in your head. I've been singing this song to myself all week. If I'm not mistaken, and it was a long time ago, and my brain does not quite work as well as it used to, as I'm sure it's obvious to you. This was a song I do actually remember hearing on the radio a few times back in the mid-1990s when my friends and I used to still listen to FM radio when it was still semi-palatable. I love this song. It isn't necessarily one of the best songs on the record, but I would make the argument it's one of the catchiest. Like I said, it's been stuck in my head all week because I've been listening to this record nonstop over the last few days. The next song is We're All Happy. This song is like a real kind of bubblegum, art pop, post-punk kind of sound. Lyrically, this song is brilliant. I love this song because it sounds like the inner dialogue of an anxiety-ridden insomniac. I'm the kind of person, this is sort of who I am. I am an anxiety-ridden insomniac. I'm the type of guy, I will stay up, I'm a night owl, for one thing. I stay up late at night. I like to stay up late watching movies or documentaries or old television shows that my wife doesn't necessarily have appreciation for, and I will literally be the guy who I will be asleep on the couch and I'll decide, okay, it's time to go to bed. I got to work in the morning. I'll go upstairs. And as soon as my head hits the pillow, man, my brain just takes off. And it's just something that I have a really hard time corralling. I go over the past day. I start beating myself up over every little mistake I feel as if I've made within the last 24 hours. And I'm not even like a good insomniac in the sense that I'm not staying awake, solving the world's problems. I'm not curing the housing crisis. Generally, I'm trying to decide who was my favorite character on Pee-wee's Playhouse or something stupid like that, which was probably Dirty Dog. Anybody but Randy, really. What was up with Randy? Why was he such a jerk all the time? I mean, what are you doing, man? I mean, life is short. You got to try to leave a little bit of positivity behind. All Randy ever did was show up, give P-Dub the business, and then he was gone. I mean, why do you have to be such a little turd all the time? And what was the deal with the flat top? I mean, who wears a flat top these days? Man, I hated Randy. When I was a kid, and I was obsessed with Pee-wee's Playhouse, well into middle school and high school, by the way, whenever Randy would come on the show, I would literally want to fight him. I hated Randy. But that's the kind of stuff I think about at night when I'm trying to go to sleep. I think about my day. I dwell on every little mistake I've made basically throughout my entire life. And I try to decide who my favorite character was on Pee-wee's Playhouse. I love this song. It is anxiety-ridden. It is chaotic. And it's a little bit abstract lyrically because it just kind of like goes in a whole bunch of different directions. But like I said before when I was talking about the first song, Nerves, when it comes to Rob Zabrecky and his songwriting and just the type of person I get the sense that he is, this is not contrived. This is not something that was like, hey, I'm going to try to sound poetic here. I'm going to try to sort of emulate what Kurt Cobain did I think this is authentic. I think Rob Zabrecky was a brilliant lyricist, and this song to me is one of my favorite songs on the record. The next song after that is Invisible. Kind of a post-new wave, Butthole Surfers, PO'd era kind of sound on this song. This makes me think of a couple that live like pretty much completely in their own world. They are self-sustained. You know, they're together, but they're sort of together. They are sort of alone in the world. They are obsessed with their little lives and their little interests together. I think it's actually a very beautiful song. I think it paints a picture of a very sort of pristine, sort of utopian relationship. I think both of these people in this relationship are socially awkward, and they're artsy, and they're artistic, and they aren't particularly interested in what's going on in the world around them or what people around them think. I love this song. I think lyrically it is beautiful. It really paints a picture of a relationship that is, I think, pretty beautiful. It actually kind of reminds me of a way in the relationship that my wife and I have, because we both are so kind of weird, and we're both sort of not antisocial. I mean, I'm the antisocial one of our relationship. My wife likes to go out and do stuff with her friends, whereas I prefer to sit here and listen to records and take notes for this dumb little YouTube channel. But we both get so into what we're into that everything else around us sort of dissipates. And I love the imagery in the lyrics in this song. The next song after that is a song called Pharmaceutical Itch. I used to think that this song was about heroin addiction. And now I'm not saying that it isn't. But I also love the lyric where he says, understanding nothing can be so comforting. I used to think that this song was written about heroin addiction. Now, like I said, I'm not saying that it isn't, but this is another one of those songs within the Possum Dixon catalog that lyrically, for me, I've been going back and reading through all of these lyrics all week. This is one of those songs that just kind of stumped me. And sometimes you just have to accept the fact that you don't understand what a song is about. At least I do. Because I feel like sometimes when I interpret these songs, a lot of it is just how I view it. I'm not saying that this is how it's written. It's sort of how I see it, what makes me think of. And for this song, it has stumped me as far as what it means. I remember thinking when I was younger and I'd first bought this album, and maybe it was because we were living in the 90s. And it was like the height of the heroin epidemic, especially in Seattle. You hear about all these bands in Seattle that were, the heroin bands. And I used to think that's what this song was about. It may be, and it may not be, but it is awesome. It is beautifully written lyrically. It's got a real traditional sort of college rock type sound to it. The next song after that is a song called Executive Slacks, which is arguably my favorite song on the record, although there's a few that would sort of be in the running for that. This has like a real art pop, sort of post-punk kind of vibe to it. To me, this song is about basically like the slow death of the 9-to-5 world. And, for me, at a certain age, it's sort of a depressing realization when you discover that you end up forfeiting the best years of your life. Most people end up forfeiting the best years of their lives to working for other people who don't necessarily care about you or your well-being, people that are generally pleased with your performance as long as you're standing where you're supposed to be standing and you're generating revenue. Now, I'm not saying that as somebody who's complaining about having to go to work every day. I consider myself to be a very hard worker. I am incredibly dedicated to my craft. I take what I do very seriously, and I've been doing what I do over 20 years. At the same time, though, it's not necessarily my passion, and as I get older and I continue working for other people, it's sort of a shitty feeling to realize that tomorrow, if I weren't standing where I'm normally standing, within a day or two, somebody else would be standing where I'm normally standing, and they would be generating the revenue that I generally generate, or usually generate. And, sometimes it's difficult to understand why your employer is always trying to, stifle your benefits and make it more and more difficult for you to take time off and have time away from work. Like I said, I'm not somebody who complains about going to work. I'm incredibly committed to my craft. Now, that's being said, it isn't my passion, and one of my biggest fears in life is that when I die, I will be remembered for my trade and not necessarily anything else, if I'm remembered at all, which is most unlikely, I would suggest. But it also makes you realize, and I'm not an envious person. In fact, I think envy is sort of a dangerous thing, but it does make me happy for people who get to go to work every day and do something that they are incredibly passionate about. Now, like I said, I am extremely dedicated to what I do. I feel like I'm relatively decent at what I do. Other people notice my craftsmanship all the time, but it isn't something I'm necessarily passionate about. And I think that's what this song sort of makes me think of, is it's like the narrator in this song is basically saying, hey, I would rather die than go sit in a cubicle 9 to 5, son. And that's just sort of what this song makes me think of. And it makes me, when I'm not at work, I have a job where when I'm at work, I'm all in. It's all encompassing. It surrounds me. But fortunately, I have a job in the sense where when I leave work at the end of the day, I don't necessarily have to bring it home with me. So my home time is my away from work time, which is when I get to pursue being a really terrible YouTube host and listening to records and spending time with my wife and my dogs and things like that. At least I'm grateful for that. But it does make me happy for people that actually get to go out and do what they are so passionate about in order to earn a living, is what I'm getting at. The next song after that is a song called Regina. To me, this has like a real kind of like Violent Femmes, sort of surf rock kind of vibe to it. The girl in the song, Regina, is very artsy. She's very cute, but she's also sort of airheaded and aloof. The girl seems to be, a little bit out of reach, but to you, she is the most interesting person in the world. Now, your friends might not necessarily think that she is the, most pristine piece of carpet that they've ever seen, but to you, she is, the most interesting girl in the world. I also love in this song how it mentions that she's a huge Soft Cell fan. So am I. At least, maybe that could be the conversation stimulator to at least get your foot in the door, break the ice, if you will. I mean, who doesn't love a Soft Cell? To me, they are pretty snug. The next song after that is a song called John Struck Lucy. This song has a real, like, late 80s, early 1990s sort of a Dead Milkmen kind of vibe to it, especially with some of the vocal tricks that go on sort of throughout. It reminds me of the song specifically. It reminds me of the song Smokin' Banana Peels by the Dead Milkmen. I love this song. It gets real sort of repetitive. It's sort of dark. I like it. If I had to pick kind of a weakest song on the album, however, I would say that this is probably the one that I would choose, although, like I said, I don't really think there's anything bad off this record. It's definitely not anything that is, regrettable or reprehensible. To me, it's just probably the weakest song on the album. The last song is a song called Elevators. This has a real sort of B-52s post-punk kind of art pop feel to it. It talks about, this is another one of those songs that's sort of difficult to kind of interpret what it means lyrically, because it's a little bit chaotic lyrically. It's a little bit muddy, but that's, again, one of the things I love about this band and Rob Zabrecki's vocals and his lyrics, for that matter. I like the fact that they're not always something that you can easily sort of decipher. And like I said before, and once before that, I feel that it does come from a place of authenticity. Sometimes bands, when they write these lyrics, especially in the 90s, this was such a thing in the 90s with the kind of like abstract lyrics. Sometimes I felt as if, band members were basically sitting around with a thesaurus just trying to come up with words to make them sound deeper and more interesting than they were. Whereas with this band and Rob Zabrecky, I feel like it comes from a place of authenticity because he is kind of a weird dude. If you go find him on YouTube, and I mean that as a total compliment. I love Rob Zabrecky. I love this band. But there's a lyric in this song where he talks about being wasted in an elevator. It reminds me, I was living in Seattle on New Year's Eve, 1999-2000. In fact, I had just moved to Seattle not long before that. I moved to Seattle in September of 1999 from the Bay Area after my first sort of breakup. And I was out at a party on New Year's Eve. And of course, if you are old enough to remember, the New Year's Eve of 1999-2000 was a big thing because of the whole Y2K hype. We didn't know what was going to happen. I was somebody, and I was young. I mean, I was like 24 years old back in 1999, but so I was relatively young and even dumber than I am now, but I was sort of skeptical of Y2K leading up to it. But that night, New Year's Eve 1999, I was uneasy, to be honest with you. I thought that things might actually happen. In fact, I remember my friend and I were talking about, of course, we'd been tipping many, not a few, we'd been tipping many, but he and I were, at one point in the night, we were talking about our strategy if the apocalypse happens, what we were going to do. He and I were going to team up together, by the way. We were going to, take on the world together. But I remember we were at this party earlier in the evening, and everybody was drinking, having a good time. People were getting, feel fairly inebriated, I would make the suggestion. And at this apartment complex, there was this sort of, it wasn't glass, but it was this plexiglass elevator that you could see in. And all the apartments were sort of outdoors. It had the outdoor, all the apartments were facing the outside. It didn't have indoor hallways, and it had this plexiglass elevator. And I noticed at a certain point in time that there was this girl in the elevator who kept riding it up and down. And at first, I hadn't really paid that much mind to it until my friend my friend pointed out to me, he's like, hey, that chick in that elevator's naked. And I remember looking up at the elevator, and sure enough, she was in there, in the buff, and she kept going up and down in the elevator. Now, obviously, she was feeling pretty good about herself and life in general. And I remember over the next 10, 15 minutes, several people of both genders got in there with her. And it basically became this naked elevator that was just going up and down repeatedly. And every time I hear this song now, the song Elevators, it makes me think of that moment because it talks about being wasted in an elevator. And I do remember thinking at the time, wow, that girl is not too difficult to look at either. I wasn't about to get naked in the elevator. There isn't enough booze in the world, son, to have me even take my shirt off in public, let alone Free Willy. Anyway, Y2K happened. My friend and I, this party was up on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And if you know anything about the geography of Capitol Hill, if you walk down to the very bottom of Capitol Hill, you can sort of see all of downtown, all the skyline. And of course, the Space Needle's at kind of the far end of downtown. And my friend and I, at midnight, we sort of snuck away from the party because he and I had become convinced, even though I was very skeptical of Y2K, I think I said 9/11 earlier, Y2K. I was very skeptical of it, but around 11:30 p.m., I became a pretty firm believer. I was sort of becoming more and more paranoid that something bad was going to happen. So he and I walked down to the end of Capitol Hill to sort of overlook downtown Seattle just to see if the bombs were going to go off or if buildings were going to start imploding or if the Space Needle was going to, suddenly topple over. And we stood there, and at midnight, we didn't have cell phones back in those days. I think we had our watch. And of course, people are starting to blow off all the fireworks around you, and nothing happened. And of course, after 9/11, or I keep saying 9/11, after Y2K didn't happen, I was like, yeah, I told you, this whole thing's stupid. Because I was sort of skeptical leading up to it. But I gotta tell you, in the 11th hour, man, I was pretty convinced something bad was going to happen. Of course, after it didn't, I was like, yeah, that was right. I knew it all along. Idiots. Anyway, if you haven't checked out the band Possum Dixon, or if you haven't in at least a while, I would highly recommend you go back and check out not only this self-titled debut album, which to me is their best. I'm not going to lie. I do think that this is their best record. But also go back and check out their second record, Star Homes, from 1996, and their final album, New Sheets, in 1998. Now, after the band dissolved in 1998, or 1999, excuse me, singer Rob Zabrecky became a relatively successful author and actor, and now what he's most known for is as a magician, which I think is pretty snug. Now, I'm not necessarily the biggest magic guy in the world, but if you go out and you check out Rob Zabrecky on YouTube, check out some of his magic stuff. It's actually pretty cool. He is an incredibly interesting and artistic person. I would make the suggestion that he was as good a musician as he is a magician, and I will always contend, because I am such a huge fan of this band, that they should have been more popular. Now, popularity doesn't really mean jack shit at the end of the day. I mean, look at what's popular today. But the fact that this band has less than 3,000 listeners on Spotify, and again, that may be the world's worst gauge of popularity or importance or relevance ever, but it just happens to make me want to puke. Especially if you compare this band to stuff that is just millions of times more popular. I don't understand it. Even bands from this era that are more popular than Possum Dixon, there are bands that can't sniff this band's jock. So check them out. We need to get this band's name back out there. That is one of my missions in life, and I can pretty much guarantee you that you have not heard the last of Possum Dixon on this channel, because I am actually going to go back at some point in time, probably in the relatively near future, and talk about each of the other two records in their entirety, because I love this band, and it is my mission, one of my missions in life, to spread the word on this band and get them back into the sort of public consciousness. One of my other missions in life, based on my favorite TV show of all time. Now, I wanted to do it when the dude was still alive, Howard Hessman, who sadly passed away not too long ago. I don't know the exact year or date, but my favorite TV show of all time is WKRP in Cincinnati, and it is my dream to, at some point in time in the city of Cincinnati, have a statue built of Johnny Fever. Now, if you've ever seen the Fonz in Milwaukee, or the Mary Tyler Moore in Minneapolis, or the Bob Newhart in Chicago. So, I'm not pretending as if this is the most original idea that's ever been birthed, but it is my mission in life to have a Johnny Fever statue built in downtown Cincinnati. It's going to happen at some point in time, and I am going to be the architect of that project. Just as it is one of my missions in life to bring Possum Dixon back into the public consciousness. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back weekly for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, I'll talk to you then.